Hi, this is Joe Bullen, and welcome back to learning about VisualBasic.net. In this video, we're going to look at Link to Objects. Language integrated query to objects is a nice first step to learning about all the things that you can do with language integrated query. We're going to only touch about Link to Objects, but once you start to enjoy what you can do with just Link to Objects, you'll start to want to know more about how to do link to XML or link to a SQL server or link to Entity Framework. You'll find that it'll give you a lot more power, flexibility, and clarity in your programming code. To get to learn about link, first take a look at the link that I have, or I should say the URL, that goes out to Microsoft, where you can learn about the Visual Basics version of Link. Now, both C# and Visual Basic are very similar, but there are just a few variances in the way it's coded. You'll actually discover that Visual Basic .NET's Link version gives us even more extension methods than C# does currently. And you'll discover that it is a very nice extra tool to add to your tool set to learn to code. Well, let's go to our program that I'm going to show you about how to use Link. I have on the screen Visual Studio up with the Windows Designer showing, and I have a very simple text box with 3 buttons. The text box has been set for multi-line so that it's expanded, been set. I've anchored it to top, left, and right, so as the form grows, this will grow in relationship to it. Also, because of the kind of output that I'm going to be writing to, I've changed the font from its default Segoe UI 9 point to Consolis 11.25 point. This is a fixed font versus a variable proportional font, and it'll allow us to have columns in our output a little bit easier than if we were to use some other font to use for our particular text box output. So I've changed that. Multi-line has been set for this text box, and I call this text box simply results text box. Then I have 3 different buttons that we're going to look at: link to an integer array, a link to a string array, and then I'm going to create a collection of students and use the IEnumerable of the collection to do a link to the collection. So you can see how all these will give us different abilities to handle querying data within these types of collections, either a integer array, string array, or a generic collection. So let's take a look at the documentation for this program and also a screen capture of this screen that we're going to be using, so you can create your own or at least study in more detail this program. The main code that we have for this code, the image is out at Imgur, and you can go right to this link to it and see the screen that I'll be using with some data in it. And also at Pastebin is the actual code that I have in this presentation. So you can go out there and study the code, download it, and try it out yourself. This is a first step to learning that there's much to learn about Link. But once you start getting your feet wet, you'll want to dive in and learn more about Link. So I heartily recommend that you try out the example I have here at Pastebin. And since it is a video, I have to go fairly fast through it to get everything covered. And this will give you time to study in more detail the code. Also at YouTube or other videos to learn about that I've done for VisualBasic.net, and I invite you to go out at YouTube to Bullen Presents to take a look at the other videos. So if you'd like to pause your video at this point in time and copy down these URLs to the different sites to get the code, the image, or to go out to YouTube to see more things, these are the URLs to that site. Okay, well, let's get into our program. This is Link to Objects demo, and as I said, the screen just has a text box on it, and we're going to output text to it, and I'm going to be doing a lot of concatenation of strings. And when you do that, you want to take advantage of the string builder class, and therefore I'm doing the system imports, system text imports to make it easier to reference the string builder class. This is a way to go when you have a lot of concatenation of strings taking place. Instead of outputting everything directly to the text box, we'll use the string builder first, which is more efficient, and then we'll actually assign that string builder's data to our result text box text property as we go through. Now, one of the things I talked about in the last video is in an introduction to LINQ is the option inferred on. This is very helpful as we work with LINQ because we're working with a query variable that will change based off of what we're querying. And this eliminates the need for the as keyword to define our query variable. And this is highly recommended to turn this on. If you're working with C#, you know about the var data type. It dynamically changes as you have different data, and this is the equivalent in VisualBasic.net. So with option inferred on and option strict on, you can also set this at the options area of Visual Studio for all your projects, but I've done it here in the code so that you're aware that it's on. This makes our coding much easier to be done. Well, let's take a look at that first button we're going to look at, and this is going to be a link to an integer array. And as you see it come down here with our class of our form, we're going to do some simple processing on that, some which is very familiar if you're used to working with arrays. And if you're not, this will also be an area to learn about that as well. What I've done is I've declared an integer array called int_array. It's going to hold a number of elements, and the number it's going to hold is based off of the initialization list that I provided in the curly brackets. And so here are my series of numbers that I'm pulling in, and I'm defining it as integer in this case, but I'm pulling all that information into the int array. Now, traditionally, the next series lines of code are how we process an array. Now, the first line up here for the dim output to string builder is to begin our process of using that string builder to concatenate all the data that will eventually be outputted to our results label or results text box. And so this is the first line of that as I declare the string builder output variable. And then I'm going to loop through the integer array by declaring an index for the subscript as integer, starting at the first element, which is 0 based, and then going to the upper bounds of the first rank of that. So we're processing through a one-dimensional array with this line of code. And you'll see that I'm making a reference with the IDX as the subscript, finding the element that I'm working with within my integer array. Then I'm using the toString function to add that to my output variable, using output append to my string builder, and putting the data in there. The next one I'm going to do is where we actually begin using LINQ. And this is where I'm going to do LINQ to find the odd numbers only. And here's my query variable, odd numbers. And because I have option infer on, as I put my cursor over it, it says to me that this is a I enumerable of integer. So it knows how to see what to declare itself as based off of what is in the clause that I have in my query. And here I'm taking the data source of int array. I'm then going to go through and say for each number in the integer array on that, I'm going to look and examine for whether it's even or odd. Now, modulus 2 is a way for us to quickly find out if we have a even or odd number. If it returns back 0 for the remainder, it's an even number. If it doesn't return back 0, it's an odd number. So I'm saying if it's not equal to 0. It'll be an odd number, and that's my condition I'm looking for to be true. Then select that number that matches that condition. So now I have my odd numbers query variable. Once again, this does not hold data in it yet. It's only the definition of this clause that's being held within odd numbers. We actually have deferred the execution till I come down to the for each processing. And here's where I take the odd numbers query variable and process it. So I'm looking for each element in odd numbers and then outputting it to string. So we'll get only the odd numbers that are part of our string array up here. The next one I'm going to do is to take the first 4 elements of the array. And I'm using the special keyword take. In this case, I'm saying take 4 of the elements in the array and return that, not of the whole array. And so I can selectively filter what I want to return back. And what is nice is if you're doing web programming, you'd want to be able to page your data to the user instead of trying to retrieve all the data in one call. This allows us with the take and skip to retrieve a group of data at a time. And here I'm taking the first 4 in this situation. Once again, I'm then going through and using the for each statement to process the data by referencing the element to string function. Now the last one is what is exciting, and this is what's called link extension methods. And as I said, in Visual Basic there are about 41 different types. Now disregard for a moment the string format. This is just to format the data for the output. What I want you really to focus on is the simple aggregate functions I have over here of int array dot sum and int array average, min, and max. That is all it takes with link query to get those values. Traditionally processing array, we would have to set a variable and add to it as we loop through the array, and then we'd have to divide it by the number of elements to get the average, and then we'd also have to have buckets that hold the minimum and maximum as we're looping through that array. All this is done with a simple adding of the link extension method to our array to process it. So this is what is really nice. Now, of course, you might want to look more about the string format method to take advantage of formatting your data. And once again, you'll see here a little difference. I'm using N1 to make this a 1 position to the right of the decimal point for the average. So I have a little bit more refined result being returned. So this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing the original list, then we're going to do odd numbers, then we're going to take the first 4 elements of the list, and then we're going to take a look at some of the summary information about the sum, average, min, and max. Let's run this and try it out. There's our text box ready to be filled when I hit the button. And there's our original values using the traditional looping through with our subscript index to our referencing each of the elements. But here is our link version very quickly using our modulus math to get our odd numbers. And then here's our take 4 to get the first 4 elements of our integer array. And then you'll see the last part is our quick summary of the sum, average, minimum, and maximum. And once again, this is a nice part of using the link extensions that you'll see, and you can take advantage to quickly get the information about what you have in your numeric array that you might be using. Well, let's take a look at the link to string array. A little bit different kind of process because we're going to be working with a string. Let's go back to our code. I'm going to slide on down to our area where we use that link string button click event, and you'll see that I've defined a string array, str array, as a string array, and I'm using the initialization list to give it its values, and it'll determine how many elements based off of the different number of names I have in my initialization list. Also, just to bring to your attention, I have two Petersons in there because we're going to sort by last name, first name. And I want to show you how it'll be able to be sorted as we process this. Now, once again, our first output will be doing the traditional method of processing an array. In this case, we're processing a string array, but we're outputting the information using the index, getting the element as we're processing through from 0 to the upper bounds of that one-dimensional array to be processed. So this gives us our original values. And instead of using the take that I used in the numeric array, I'm going to use now the skip to get the ones in the array after I pass over the first three. Once again, this is a good thing for when we're trying to process a web page where we're bringing back a page at a time of data instead of trying to bring back all the data at once. We'd use the take and the skip and adjust that as we want to page through. So here I'm getting my skip first three query variable, and then I'm processing it, and it's getting resolved as it goes through this process through here. Once again, it's taking advantage of outputting this data through the string builder that I defined as an output variable. And the last name, last one we're going to do is breaking up the element and basically finding the last name and first name, which is very useful when you're processing a field that has the full name instead of having it autonomized as first name, last name, and middle initial. Here we see we're coming through and we're using the string array again, and I'm adding a new variable, full name, and I'm using the split method on name using the blank space to be the delimiter for the split. So I get a first and last name, or I get basically two different elements of my full name. In this case, the last name is the second element, and the first name is the 0 referenced element. And so I'm ordering it by last name, first name. And here we see on the select where I've actually transformed the data. Instead of just picking a name or full name to come back, I'm actually bringing back full name as last name, concatenating the comma and space, and then putting the first name back. And here we see it processed using the sorted names being processed. And then finally, we're outputting that all to the text property of our results text box. So let's watch this section process through. Okay, link to string array. Here is our initial one being processed in the normal manner using the index on our array. The next one is using our link by using the skip keyword in our clauses of creating the query. And you'll see that I've skipped over the first three elements in there and started with Steve Peterson. And the last one is our sorting of names. And here we see it sorted with last name and first name. And you'll see the Petersons have flipped correctly with it being sorted in an alphabetized method. So this is very nice. A lot of times we get fields with full names in it that aren't broken up into their unique elements. And being able to do this very quickly with LINQ is really nice. Now let's take a look at the last one. We're going against LINQ to a generic IEnumerable collection. Here's our section, and I start out by getting a student collection. And you'll see this is seen as an IEnumerable of student. And I have a method that I've defined to get students to return that back. And I'm going to show you our student class that I've created. So let's go to student class. And I have three properties in my student class. I have first name, last name, and grade point average. And I also have defined this with the full properties instead of the auto implements because I want to do validation of the data before I assign it to the backing variables. So here we see first name property. It will return first name value, the backing variables data on that. And then we can also set it if I have a non-null value being set. Otherwise, I'm going to throw an exception back to whatever tried to set that property. If it passes through correctly, it'll assign the value to the backing variable. And so this is the process we're using to validate the data before we assign it to the property. So I've assigned the first name, the last names in a similar manner on that. And then our grade point average, we want to keep between 0 and 4. So as we come through and validate our grade point average, I'm looking to see if it is greater than or less than 4 on that to be processed. Whoops, I should say greater than, yeah, that's correct, as I have greater than or less than in that situation. So we've got our range set. Then we come down to our actual constructor of the class. The default is public sub new, but I'll also provide an overloaded constructor passing into it the first name, last name, and current grade point average, and then assigning it to the properties and creating that new student. Let me pass over the actual method here and come down to our function. All classes that we create have a toString function in it, but we want to override the base class, and we have to use the overrides keyword when we use the function toString. And so I'm overriding the base class with the students class version of toString, and I'm returning back last name, first name, dash grade point average, colon, space, and then the grade point average. So I'm returning back a string that I want to construct in this class. Now let's take a look at that actual method, the get students. Here is our get students shared function. It is as IEnumerable of student, so it's of this class, and we're turning back a new list of those students. And here I'm declaring and initializing all the students, and you'll see the students here with their grade point averages coming in. It's going against the overloaded constructor as it's being processed and being added automatically to the list of students and returning back the IEnumerable of student. Now, if I were to want to add or remove students from my collection, instead of using the IEnumerable of student, I'd use the list of student. IEnumerable gives a little bit better performance, but if we need to process it for adding or removing of students after it's been initialized, then we want to use the list of students instead. Okay, so this is where I get my students from. Let's go back to our code where we came from, and we've got our collection of students. Now we're going to just iterate through our collection of students with this first loop on that. It's not LINQ, this is just simple processing through here of the collection. Now we're going to look at it in terms of sorting. And here we see that I'm using the query variable sorted students, and I'm looking at the collection of students on that. And what is nice about using LINQ is I also have IntelliSense. So I'm going to just add here s dot, and you'll see that I can then quickly pick another property to use in my order by if I wanted to. So IntelliSense does kick in nicely with the use of LINQ, and it is a good thing to enjoy as you're processing. So now I'm getting sorted students on that and processing it through and outputting it. And then I'm going to go in and get the presence list, which is those students who have a 4.0 average for the semester. And then I'm going to order those names by last name, first name, then output that information as the presence list. Then I'm going to do the dean's list. This is usually where I fall. I don't get the presence list very often when I was a student. But within this range variable, we see the grade point average has to be less than 3.99 but greater than 3.25. And that gives us the students we want for our dean's list. We're then sorting that list by last name, first name, and returning back our variable as a student. And then we're looping through, and this is where that dean's list gets processed and gets resolved, and we're outputting that data and then sending it to the results text box, text property. So let's see this one run, and notice how this one works. Okay, start. It's compiling, and I'm going to hit the link to an IEnumerable collection. Once again, we've got the collection. We're just basically looping through the collection, not doing anything, and using the toString method of the class, the student's class, to output the data. Then I'm coming through and using LINQ to do a sorted version of the same thing. Once again, using the toString method of the student's class to output the data. And then our last part is using both sorting and filtering to get the president's list and the dean's list to output that information. So I've got it by last name, first name order, and I'm getting the range, in this case for the president's list, where the person has a 4.0, and in terms of the dean's list, between 3.25 and 3.99 to get those who qualify to be on the dean's list. So this is a nice way to process. We've seen LINQ to an integer array, we've seen LINQ to a string array, and we've seen LINQ to a collection to be processed. So that gives you an idea of the using of links to objects, and I highly recommend that you learn more about LINQ. Go out to Microsoft and study about how to use LINQ. Once again, the site to take a look at is the site here for learning how to get started with LINQ in visualbasic.net. Once again, you'll see a lot of examples with C#. If you know C#, you can quickly translate it to Visual Basic, but this site gets you started in using Visual Basic itself. So go out, get your hands dirty in the code, take a look at Pastebin where I have the code for you, and try it out. I think you'll discover that once you begin to use LINQ with just the simple things like a string array, a numeric array, or a collection, you'll want to learn more about LINQ. Learning about LINQ with XML, learning about it with SQL, and especially learning about how to use it with Entity Framework. Because once you learn how to use LINQ with Entity Framework, you'll really find it hard to go back to the old methods of coding, because things become such a much easier task and clearer in our code as to what we're querying and retrieving and updating with. So please learn about LINQ. It's been around since 2008. It's about time you learn how to do LINQ in your code. So get your hands dirty in the code and take care.